Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Fitness Education Series produced by the Australian Fitness Academy. It's like progressive overload for your brain. I'm your host, Tom Rock, and today's episode we're going to talk about heart rate variability. Thanks to Phil. Phil put this question through. It's a great topic. So Phil's just got himself a nice new Garmin, which now I'm going to have to update mine, I think, because heart rate variability is a measure. Garmin, there's a lot of different ways to get heart rate variability or measure your heart rate variability. These days, they're definitely, you can get them through smartwatches, Garmin being one of them. My older version doesn't do it, so that's why I'm going to need to have an upgrade now. I'm hanging out for it. But heart rate variability has been applied for a number of years in a number of different aspects, I guess. My previous experience is using it with an athlete development program or with an athlete long-term training program. So we'll start with discussing a little bit about what heart rate variability is, and then we'll look at sort of how to use the numbers if you are tracking heart rate variability or you have the ability to. But it's not something you might find you don't need to run out and do it. But if you do have access to it, or your wristwatch is spitting out these numbers, it can be a good idea to understand how they get them and potentially what to do with the data. So heart rate variability is a measure of the variation in time between each heartbeat. So it's not how your heart rate changes, like beats per minute changes. It's a change in the time between each heartbeat. So that's probably something to understand originally, but the time in between each heartbeat is going to change, and that's what your heart rate variability is. One of the aspects that affect how the change in time between each of your heartbeats is what we call your autonomic nervous system. So there's two sides to your autonomic nervous system. There's a sympathetic nervous system and a parasympathetic nervous system. Your sympathetic nervous system is like your fight and flight response. So that's like your stress response. Your parasympathetic nervous system is what they sort of term your rest and digest. So that's when you're resting and relaxing, you upregulate the parasympathetic nervous system, and that's basically signals to your brain, and the brain will interpret that, and they'll change a whole lot of things in terms of your heart rate, your digestion, all those bodily functions that are better served at certain time points. So your brain's constantly like assessing what you're doing, what's the body need to do, and the brain gives instructions based on all these signals it's getting in. So if like you get a big email from your boss, or you got a heavy workload, or you got a deadline coming up, that might increase your stress response. So your body's going to potentially upregulate the sympathetic nervous system. You get that bit of a stress response, which is going to potentially help you focus or work harder or work to a higher level, based on there's something you need to get done. Whereas hopefully if you say are at home, you're meditating, you're doing some stretching, or you're going to sleep, we want to be able to rest, and our body needs to recuperate and recover from whatever we've done. So we upregulate the parasympathetic nervous system, and that allows us to recover better, and our body's going to upregulate all the things that are going to help us recover and potentially adapt and improve. So there's always a balance, and it's always going to go up and down throughout the day, throughout the week, or whatever it is. But it's sort of the sympathetic nervous systems are going to balance. Our responses are going to be based on our lifestyle and what we're doing, and that's going to upregulate either the sympathetic nervous system or the parasympathetic nervous system. So what we get is the heart rate variability can be a measure of what's happening with our autonomic nervous system. So based on some of the research, if the system is, or your body system or your autonomic nervous system is in more of a stress response or fight or flight, or the sympathetic nervous system, you generally find a lower heart rate variability. So the beats are going to be more consistent, is one way to do it. So your heart rate variability is lower. If you are in a more relaxed state and you're sort of rested, or you're well recovered and you're relaxed, you generally have a higher heart rate variability. So there's more variation in the time between your heartbeats. So that's basically what the heart rate variability is and what we're using it for. So if we have a lower heart rate variability, we're probably generally in more of a stressed state. Or if we have a higher heart rate variability, it's generally a sign that we're sort of relaxed or recovering, or we're not stressed, basically. So, like I said, I guess in normal situations, this is always going to go up and down. There's nothing wrong with a high heart rate variability and a low heart rate variability. It's a result of our body adapting to whatever it needs to do, and adapting to the stress. So that's something to understand. If you find yourself having a high heart rate variability, it's not a cause for panic or anything like that. It's going to change day to day. What we generally look at is using it as a measure over a period of time. So in terms of athlete development or basing it on not necessarily fitness, but tracking your program, what we want to see is if you say increase your training load, or you're just following a program and you find your heart rate variability is going up but not coming down, or it seems to be more up than it usually is, usually a good time to, or potentially measure heart rate variability is in the morning. When you wake up, check your heart rate variability, or that's how it's sort of been applied previously. It's sort of changing these now as we're using these numbers, and Garmin will use it in conjunction with a whole lot of other things to give you generally sort of your body battery score, or whatever they sort of term it, to let you know how well you sleep or how well your recovery. So they sort of use it in conjunction with a whole lot of other things, which is not a bad thing at all. But if your heart rate variability is sort of going up or showing slight increases, say you measure it every morning, and over the last 4 weeks it's sort of been more elevated than it was the previous 4 weeks, it can be a sign that either your training load is increased, and your body is sort of under a sort of a high stress time, but it may also be under recovery potentially, so maybe adding more recovery in could be important. But I guess heart rate variability is a good measure of it'll be affected by physical things for sure. So if you're doing a heavy training load, or you increase your training load, that's going to mean you potentially increase your or decrease your heart rate variability, so you're going to get a lower score, sorry. But it can also be affected by things like stress, and it can be stress to do with, obviously, everything stresses our body. It can be resistance training, cardiovascular training, it can be work, it can be lack of sleep. All these things add stress. So if we're constantly not recovering well, or we've got a lot going on, we're going to see our heart rate variability start to get decreased. I've got that wrong. So your heart rate variability will decrease. So when we look at our heart rate variability score, we can use it to look at times where we might be stressed or we might not be recovering well. And if we find that we're having like drops in our heart rate variability, it could be a sign where you can try add in some more meditation. Try focus on making sure you're getting 8 or 9 hours sleep so you can recover. Try reduce that overall stress on the body, and that can assist in recovery, and probably overall well-being, I guess. So that's sort of where it can be used in terms of managing how you feel on a day-to-day, but making sure you're not overtraining, I guess. And it's sort of trying to limit that, or use to make sure we sort of pull back on a training program, or we increase our recovery, whatever it is, before we get to that stage of reduced performance or increased risk of injury, and some other overtraining symptoms that you can potentially get if you sort of push too hard for too long and you're not recovering. And stress, nutrition, all these things are going to play a part in that. And heart rate variability is a measure that can give us a little bit of an insight into how we're functioning on the inside. If we are sort of in a high stress, maybe anxiety, whatever it is, heart rate variability might show that. Or be a measure we can just have in conjunction with everything else. It's probably good to also mention that heart rate variability, genetics is going to play a little bit of a part too, and overall fitness and things like that. So generally comparing, say, my heart rate variability to someone else's heart rate variability, there's no point comparing. It's not like a measure of fitness, for example, or strength. Like you just even though my heart rate variability might be lower than someone else's, doesn't mean I'm in a stress state. It's more individualized to you, and the data over the long run is where you might see changes. And it's good to, I think, if you're utilizing heart rate variability or you have it available to you, you don't have to give everything to this one particular measure. But I think in terms of if you have a well-structured training program that you follow consistently, and your day-to-day life is fairly consistent, you can add little things in here and there, or you might find that it does correlate well to if you have a few nights where you don't get as much sleep, or you're not eating as well, or you're quite stressed at work. This might be one of the readings that you can see. Oh, that has changed. So it can hopefully give you insight and make you aware of, well, there has been a stressful week at work. Maybe I need to, this weekend, I'm going to make sure I take some time out of my day for myself to rest, to recover, reduce stress somehow, to hopefully just bring my body back into that more relaxed state. So you can reduce some of those symptoms potentially, or just give yourself a better sort of feeling and recovery. But all those things, heart rate variability is going to be affected by fitness, our training, stress, and also our recovery. So it's a cool measurement, I think, to utilize if you've got it available. But again, most of the smartwatches these days, if they don't have heart rate variability, they're probably using different algorithms and things to do with your heart rate throughout the day and throughout your sleep to measure rest or recovery or how well you're doing again. So it's how they're using the data on the smartwatches, and it's how you want to interpret that too. But it's good to think about what can potentially be impacting changes in those things, or changes in your heart rate variability, or changes in your sleep pattern. So if you all of a sudden you're not sleeping well, or your watch says you didn't get good sleep, what's causing that? So is it maybe you're not getting as relaxed as you usually used to? If you change your sleep times, all sorts of things. But heart rate variability can be a good insight into how you're coping with your day-to-day stress. And in an athlete development or a fitness type program, generally we look at heart rate variability to see how you're coping with the current training load we're giving you. So if you're training 4 times a week and we've got you doing, could be 20 to 25 kilometers on the track per week, or how are you coping with that? And it's a really good way to individualize programs for groups of athletes potentially, because every athlete is going to have a different response to a training program. If we give 20 athletes the same program, some might cope really well and their heart rate variability scores will not change too much from, say, 4 weeks to 4 weeks to 4 weeks. But if we have athletes that maybe aren't coping too much with the training load, we potentially can see that in their heart rate variability and make adjustments to programs where needed. So that's why it's good for groups of athletes and monitoring programs. And in fitness, same things. If your clients show decreases in heart rate variability, so more of a sympathetic nervous system, their heart rate variability will decrease, and maybe it's a sign we want to get some relaxation in there, reduce some of the stress, have a bit of a deload week potentially, so we can sort of even out those autonomic nervous systems and upregulate that parasympathetic nervous system to allow them to rest and recover again, so they can get the most out of their training. Anyway, guys, I hope that sort of outlines heart rate variability, potentially how to think about it a little bit, what to do with it. Again, don't have to emphasize everything on this one number, but it's good to understand that stress and sleep and recovery will impact it just as much as sort of how much training are you doing? Is your training working? So it's a good measure to work out potentially, do I need to train more? Do I need to train less? Do I need to do more recovery? How's my body responding to everything that's happening to me at the moment? But yeah, hopefully you get a bit out of that podcast, guys. If you do have any questions on heart rate variability, how it's applied or what the measure means, please send an email to tom@afa.com.au. If you've got any other ideas for topics or anything you want me to discuss, please send me an email too, and I'm more than happy to chat about anything you guys want. Other than that, guys, have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you all soon.